In today's video, Democrats suffer humiliation after their latest visit to El Salvador. Also, Harvard University is now suing President Trump. You'll be shocked by their reasoning. And the media is now politicizing the passing of Pope Francis.
Congresswoman Maxine Dexter here, coming to you from El Salvador. I flew here last night with 3 of my colleagues to demand that Kilmar Abrego Garcia be released. He is being held in violation of a Supreme Court order expressly telling the Trump administration to effectuate and facilitate his coming home.
And people should know we're not the first here. We're not going to be the last members of Congress to be here in El Salvador fighting and demanding the return of Abrego Garcia and a lot of the folks who were sent here without due process at all.
We have people who have been detained, a veteran detained and deported by ICE, a veteran who served 2 tours in Afghanistan. So this is not just about Kilmar. We need Kilmar to come home, but we are so concerned that if this is allowed to fly, that the Trump administration will be emboldened to continue.
Now, to understand why this stunt really blew up in their face, it's to understand what happened a couple of days ago. And that is Congressman Garcia and Congressman Frost, both Democrats, obviously, wrote a letter to James Comer, who is the chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. They serve on that committee. They were asking to be approved for an official visit to El Salvador. Well, obviously it was denied, meaning James Comer is saying we're not using taxpayer dollars to fund your guys' little sideshow down to El Salvador, okay? That's what happened here. And so today, according to them, they used their own money to get down there, and it didn't go well because here's what Congressman Frost had to say on MSDNC right after.
But we got word at the embassy that our request has been denied by the government here locally. They say it's because we're not here on an official capacity. This is part of the reason why Representative Robert Garcia and I sent a letter to Chairman Comer of the Oversight Committee asking for this to be an official CODEL. But we're not giving up. We're going to continue. We have more meetings scheduled for the rest of the day. But part of this, too, is making sure that we keep the conversation alive. We're building off of the trip of Senator Van Hollen, and we're not the first members here, and we're not going to be the last.
Yeah, he can keep the conversation alive, but as this continues to drag on, more people are going to see right through this. Even though Democrats want to cry about due process, the average American believes these individuals already received due process when they crossed the border illegally. They were ultimately detained and deported, okay? That's due process for the average American out there. And by the way, it's interesting that they have energy to fly down there and use their own money and time to fight for this individual. But where was that same energy for people in North Carolina after the hurricanes? Where was the energy for the 13 service members who lost their lives? Where was the energy for Lincoln Riley and Rachel Moore? And we could keep going on and on and on. That's why I said people will see right through this. This is peak hypocrisy from Democrats. Now, here's what Senator Eric Schmidt had to say in response.
What's your reaction to this trip now by 4 more after we saw Senator Chris Van Hollen head down there?
The stupidity has no end, I guess. I can't believe that these Democrats are lining up to go down to a foreign country to visit a guy who was here illegally, a criminal, an MS-13 member who beat his wife. I mean, you can't be more plain than that. That's who this is. So I think all along, Martha, they were looking for some example of something President Trump would do that was so bad that they could rally behind. I can't believe that they're that stupid that this is the guy. This is the poster child now for their movement, and it's why support for Democrats are record low numbers. They're completely out of touch. They're viewed as having way more empathy for someone like this than victims of crime or for neighborhoods that have been inundated through mass migration with an open border. They've totally bought into this concept that borders don't mean anything, that we're all world citizens, everybody has a right to be here, and nobody should ever have to leave. And that's just not what our laws entail. That's not what it means to be a sovereign country. So I think they're headed further into political oblivion with moves like this.
I couldn't have said it any better. I mean, that is just a perfect response about what exactly has taken place. Now, Speaker Johnson said this today: House Democrats traveled to El Salvador as part of their obsession to bring a violent illegal alien, a member of MS-13, back into the United States. Could the contrast be more clear? House Republicans remain committed to doing everything we can to protect American families and keep dangerous gang members out of our country. And even President Trump had something to say. How can Biden let millions of criminals into our country totally unchecked and unvetted, with no legal authority to do so. Yet I, in order to make up for this assault to our nation, am expected to go through a lengthy legal process separately for each and every criminal alien. As usual, two different standards, only leading to the complete and total destruction of the USA. Make America great again. Yeah, and so the good news here is Congressman Frost, for whatever reason, thought it was a great idea to go on Fox News, where Will Cain called him out to his face.
Why, Congressman, are you in El Salvador? You are there for an El Salvadorian man who was a resident illegally of Maryland. You're a congressman from Florida. Why are you in El Salvador?
Well, we're here because a man who had protected status in Maryland, a Maryland man, union member, worker with a citizen wife and beautiful children, was taken out of his state and out of the United States back over here without due process.
All right, so this individual is sick. I mean, as soon as Will Cain asked him about Mr. Garcia, I mean, this guy lit up like he's obsessed with him, okay? Like he's in love with him. And he almost was blushing when he was talking about Mr. Garcia. And I'm not exaggerating. Just rewind it and watch his face again. It's quite frightening, to be honest with you. Now, this interview goes on, and it's all the same talking points, of course, but Will Cain brings up a great point. What is this really about? Is this you guys really standing on principle because you guys have been consistent with this principle of due process? Or is this more about scaring American citizens, because we know that is the playbook of Democrats? They use fear to mobilize their base and push propaganda.
Congressman, from this vantage point, respectfully, if you haven't always been dedicated to these principles, if you in fact have called the Supreme Court of the United States illegitimate very recently, and if you can acknowledge that Abrego Garcia is not your average American citizen, and his circumstances are not anyone watching that is ready to be deported from the United States, from this vantage point, respectfully, it appears as though your trip to El Salvador is less about principle and even less about Abrego Garcia and more about grandstanding and fear-mongering American citizens in a continuing narrative that casts yourself as a hero in this melodrama and the villain as Donald Trump.
I am no hero at this moment. I am one of many fighting for the rule of law and fighting to ensure that everybody in this country have due process. I am one of many. I'm not the first member of Congress here, and I'm sure as hell not going to be the last. This isn't about Maxwell Frost. This is about preventing our country from losing what makes it exceptional, that no matter who you are, when you are in the United States, you have due process.
So Will Cain did a great job of confronting the congressman. And I really just want to hone in on something. I mean, they probably have said the word due process millions of times up to this point. And the problem with that, it's called hypocrisy. Where were you guys screaming when it came to due process in regards to President Biden ignoring the Supreme Court and forgiving student loans? You didn't hear from any Democrats in that regard. But because it's President Trump, they go to the extreme. That's what's happening here. Now, let's go to our next story, because it's extreme as well. And that is Harvard. They are now deciding to sue President Trump because he froze federal funds.
Breaking tonight, Harvard is now fighting back as the university is under new pressure from the Trump administration. Published reports saying the White House is so furious with the Ivy League school, it may pull an additional $1 billion in federal funding. Harvard is taking action. Correspondent Alexis McAdams is at Harvard tonight. Good evening, Alexis.
Brett, good evening. Well, tonight, Harvard University shows absolutely no sign of giving in. Earlier tonight, they actually sued the Trump administration, saying that these cuts to their federal funding are unconstitutional and beyond the government's authority. Now, Harvard University bracing for impact yet again, with the White House planning to cut another $1 billion in federal funding, according to the Wall Street Journal. So far, more than $2 billion in federal funds have been frozen as House Republican leadership opens a civil rights investigation into Harvard.
We could make a strong argument that they're out of compliance and should not receive a single penny of federal funds.
Okay, let's read this quote, and I want you to really pay attention. Harvard University posted on X 4 hours ago. Moments ago, we filed a lawsuit to halt the funding freeze because it is unlawful and beyond the government's authority. This is the president of Harvard saying that. Now, Congressman Burchard said this in response, and that's where I'm at with what he is saying. You mean to tell me that it's unlawful and beyond the government's authority to decide where it sends our money? So essentially, Harvard, who's supposed to be the most elite university out there, is claiming that they're suing the president of the United States because they don't believe he has the authority to freeze federal funds. Freeze federal funds. I mean, you can't make this up. This is insane. Now, here's more details on this lawsuit.
This lawsuit is coming in. It's being filed against a variety of different agencies and cabinet secretaries, from RFK Jr. at the Department of Health and Human Services to Pam Bondi to the Defense Department. Basically all the agencies that have some funding for research programs at Harvard University. But we've just obtained a letter from the Harvard president that explains what is at stake here. And Alan Garber, the president, writes this. He said these actions have stark real-life consequences for patients, students, faculty, staff, researchers, and the standing of American higher education in the world. He goes on to say the consequences of the government's overreach will be severe and long-lasting.
Yeah, so I'm not obviously a legal expert, but I'd be shocked if President Trump lost this battle. I would. I just don't see how it's possible. I mean, anybody with a brain knows these are federal funds. Who controls federal funds? Obviously, Congress appropriates them, but the president, at any time he deems, can freeze them or move them around. And so that's my main point in all of this. And in case you didn't know this, the only way Harvard's even able to pull this off, in my personal opinion, is the value of their endowment. I mean, it's $50+ billion. So they have the money to get the lawyers together and actually sue the administration. Now, whether or not they're going to be successful, I say they won't.
Professor Alan Dershowitz joins me. Good evening, sir. And I want to start first with Harvard suing the federal government. Your thoughts on this lawsuit?
Harvard's going to lose. It has no obligation legally, the government, to fund a $53 billion university. I don't understand the basis of the lawsuit. They're claiming First Amendment, but Harvard has the First Amendment right to speak and to teach and academic freedom, but it doesn't have the right to get funding. I think the lawsuit is designed to send a message to the administration: come sit down and negotiate. Their two lawyers who they hired initially are negotiators. They're close to the Trump family and Trump business. And I think this is simply a ploy to try to get a resolution. About a third of the things that the government asked for from Harvard are right. They should do it. A third of them may be wrong, and about a third of them are subject to negotiation. So this case will settle. But if it goes to the Supreme Court, it's going to lose. It may win in the district court because it's Massachusetts, but it will lose in the Supreme Court.
It absolutely will, because like I've been repeating since this whole story became a thing, President Trump has the authority here. And Alan, by the way, was the youngest law professor at the age of 28 years old at Harvard. So I think he knows exactly what he's talking about. Unlike this next clip I'm going to show you, because CNN, they'll bring on anybody as long as they will help push the same narrative that what President Trump is doing here is wrong. And this guy even goes further by saying it's exactly what Putin would do.
I think the Trump administration is going after Harvard for the same reason that Vladimir Putin went after universities in Russia, that Xi Jinping went after universities in China, that Viktor Orban went after universities in Hungary. Authoritarians don't want alternative sources of information, of moral judgment, of alternative ideas. They want full control.
Okay, we don't have to go any further with this nonsense. And it is that, and it's my own personal opinion, but let me explain why. So he's saying that the president wants control and does not like alternative ideas. Didn't that just happen under Joe Biden? Weren't conservatives censored off social media? Wasn't President Trump deplatformed? Wasn't Melania Trump and Barron Trump debanked? I mean, we can keep going, okay? So again, Democrats always want to cry about something that they've done themselves, and they don't lightly do it. They go all in, okay? So that's my reaction to what he had to say. Now let's go to this next story. We already know the Pope Francis obviously passed away today at the age of 88 years old, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ridiculous reaction from people and how they had to somehow relate it to President Trump and conservatives. Listen to this.
There is now, Brendan, to say the least, a fraught relationship between Pope Francis and conservative American Catholics, among them the vice president and some members of Congress. There is actually an argument that his outreach to divorced Catholics, to the LGBTQ community and immigrants in particular, may have won in fans generally in the U.S., but bigger picture energized conservative U.S. Catholics, including those in Congress, including those in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, look, it was a tense relationship. I think a lot of the policies that President Trump advanced were anathema to Pope Francis way back in the beginning of Trump's presidential, elevation in 2016. He talked about building a wall, of course, at his rallies, and the Pope says those who talk about building walls rather than bridges, they're not Christian. Over the years, you're right, the Pope has been critical either directly or elliptically of some of the policies that Trump has put into place, particularly with regard to immigration, policies that the Pope considered to be less than empathetic. And the president has bristled at that. At the same time, he understands that his base includes an awful lot of Catholics. A lot of Catholics support President Trump, so he's been careful to not go too far at times. And he did put out a statement of condolence today, but it was a short and very concise one, simply saying, "Rest in peace. May God bless all those who loved him."
All right, so maybe you guys can help me answer this in the comment section below, because I don't get it. What does President Trump have to do with the passing of Pope Francis? Now, it's not just in the media. If you go on social media, you'll find some Democrats claiming that J.D. Vance might have been behind his passing all of a sudden. They'll even try to conflate that a post that President Trump put up also may have something to do with the passing of Pope Francis. And that post was this, quote, "The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but rather by those who watch them without doing anything to stop them." Again, I just don't get it. Maybe you guys can help me in the comment section. Here is what CNN had to say.
Just before President Trump began his second term, Pope Francis described Trump's planned mass deportations as a disgrace.
He wants to attack us from securing our border. He's got a wall around the Vatican, does he not? So he's got a wall around to protect his people and himself, but we can't have a wall around the United States.
The pontiff's friction with the Trump administration was hardly evident during Vice President J.D. Vance's meeting with the Pope on Easter. That was just hours before he died, and migrants around the globe lost their greatest crusader.
Yeah, if there's one main criticism I have for the Pope, now that he's gone, is that he became politicized. I think that's one of his biggest mistakes. There's no reason to mix politics with religion. That is why we're so polarized as a country. Now, let's go to the question of this video, because I'm really interested to get your guys' take. What do you guys think about the 4 Democrats who went down to El Salvador using their own money and got rejected? They were not able to secure a meeting, and apparently they're going to stay until they can get Mr. Garcia out of there. Let me know what you guys think about all that in the comment section below. Now, earlier, President Trump and Pete Hegseth had to shut down the media from launching a new scandal. And yes, this is in relation to Signalgate. So if you missed out on that story and more from earlier, all you have to do is click on that video because it's coming up right now.